This is Cyprus, one island in the eastern Mediterranean cut in half by United Nations buffer zone. Greek south, Turkish north. Most people trace that division to 1974. They're off by 2,500 years. In the 540s BC, Cyrus the Great pushes the Persian Empire to the Aegean coast and draws a line across the world. That line has never been erased. One ancient conflict encoded the divide between East and West into the geography of civilization itself. To understand why that line exists, we need to go back to a world already deeply connected and about to be torn apart. Before the wars, the Mediterranean was a single economic zone. Athens depended on grain shipped from the Black Sea and from Egypt, cut either supply line and the city starves. Phoenician merchants carried luxury goods, purple dye, glass, incense, from the Levant to Greek ports and beyond. Tin and silver flowed from the western Mediterranean. Thousands of ships crossed overlapping trade routes linking southern Iran to Sicily, the Nile Delta to the coasts of southern France. This was not a world of isolated civilizations. It was a web, fragile, vital, spanning everything the ancient world knew. The scope of what's coming stretches from the Persian heartland to the central Mediterranean across 2.5 centuries, from the 560s to Alexander's conquest in the 320s BC. When Persia and Greece collided, that web shattered. The clash wasn't just military, it ran along 3 fault lines: religion, politics, economics, each representing a fundamentally different way of organizing civilization. Religion. Persia followed Zoroastrianism, centered on Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of the Persian Zoroastrian faith. One god, one cosmic order, one truth. Greece worshipped dozens of gods: Zeus, Athena, Poseidon, each governing a separate domain, each capable of conflicting with the others, not just different gods, different conceptions of reality, a single divine will versus a universe of competing powers. Politics. Persia was a universal empire. One divinely appointed king, the king of kings, ruled from India to Egypt, authority radiating from a single throne. Greece had no center. It was a constellation of city-states, each polis an independent, self-governing city and its surrounding territory. Some were oligarchies, some tyrannies. Athens was experimenting with democracy. To Greeks, the idea that one man should rule everything was barbarism. Economics. Persia ran on imperial taxation and land routes, wealth flowing inward to the king's treasury from 20 provinces. Greece ran on maritime trade networks, decentralized, competitive, sea-based, 2 economic engines pulling in opposite directions. In the 540s BC, Cyrus the Great conquers Lydia and pushes the Persian frontier into Asia Minor, modern Turkey. For the first time, Persian soldiers stand on the Aegean coast, face to face with Greek cities. The fault line crystallizes geographically. It runs through the Bosphorus and the Hellespont, down the Anatolian coast, across the eastern Mediterranean, and straight through Cyprus. One island caught between 2 worlds. Everything east, Persia. Everything west, Greece. The line is drawn. The wars didn't just destroy, they created, and the line they drew didn't fade, it deepened. The collision was so enormous it demanded entirely new forms of thought. Herodotus, born in Halicarnassus, modern Bodrum in Turkey, grew up in a Greek city under Persian control. That dual identity drove him to investigate the conflict, traveling both worlds, interviewing witnesses, comparing accounts. The result was the Histories, the first systematic work of historical inquiry ever composed. Before Herodotus, the past was myth and poetry. After him, it was something you could research. Then Aeschylus. He didn't write about the war from a distance. He fought at Marathon and Salamis. In 472 BC, he staged The Persians, the oldest surviving play in Western literature. It tells the story from the Persian side. A Greek combat veteran chose to dramatize the enemy's grief at Salamis. The scale of the conflict pushed human creativity past limits no one knew existed. The video's central claim: the geographic line Cyrus drew in the 540s BC didn't disappear after the wars ended. It became the contested boundary for every major civilizational collision that followed. 5th century BC, Greece versus Persia. 1st century BC through 3rd century AD, Rome versus Parthia, fighting over the same Anatolian and Mesopotamian corridor. 4th through 7th centuries, Byzantium versus Sassanid Persia, Eastern Rome locked against Persia's successor dynasty along the same frontier. 11th through 13th centuries, Crusaders versus Islamic states, the line running through the Levant and Eastern Mediterranean. 15th through 20th centuries, European powers versus the Ottoman Empire, the Ottomans controlling the very territory Persia once held. And today, Cyprus, NATO's southeastern edge, Turkey's stalled bid for European Union membership. 5 successive civilizational confrontations, separated by centuries, fought along the same geographic corridor. The names change, the religions change, the empires rise and fall, the fault line does not move. Everything we've traced, every claim about this fault line, depends on sources that are deeply flawed. 3 types of evidence exist, and none is objective. Greek literary sources, Herodotus, Aeschylus, later historians, give us rich narrative, but they're layered with legend, myth, and folklore that render Persian perspectives nearly invisible. Herodotus mixes genuine eyewitness research with folk tales, and we can't always distinguish one from the other. Persian royal inscriptions carved in cuneiform, the wedge-shaped script of the ancient Near East, deciphered only in the 19th century, let kings speak in their own voice. But every inscription serves one purpose: glorifying the king under Ahura Mazda. Royal propaganda, start to finish. Neither side gives objective history. The corrective is archaeology. Excavations at Persepolis reveal imperial sophistication Greek sources ignore. Battlefield relics confirm sites Herodotus described, and underwater surveys now search the Aegean seabed for wrecks of Persian warships at exact locations Herodotus recorded. When divers find hull timbers where a 2,500-year-old text says "ship sank," history cross-checks itself. The Greek-Persian Wars didn't determine who won a few battles. They encoded a civilizational division into the geography, politics, and cultural memory of the entire Mediterranean, and every civilization that inherited it. The concepts of East and West as opposing categories trace directly to this era. But those categories were constructed partly by biased sources and have been used to justify conflicts ever since. The Persians were not barbarians. They built a sophisticated multi-ethnic empire with legal and administrative traditions Greek sources barely acknowledge. Our picture of them remains filtered through the victor's lens. Return to Cyprus, one island, still bearing the scar of a line drawn 2,500 years ago. That line runs through more of our world than most people ever notice.